What is going on, everyone? My name is Andy. Welcome back to another FPL video. In this one, we're taking a look at the best cheap defenders. So this is going to be any player that's 4.5 million or below. I'm going to take a look at the options with the best minutes first of all, and then we'll have a look at everyone else as well. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to give it a like. If you haven't yet hit subscribe, please make sure you do. Trying to hit 400,000 subscribers before game week 1. And if you want to get your team rated for free, check out the My Team Tour on Fantasy Football Hub. Links in the description below. So first up is Aston Villa's new signing, Torres, who comes in at just 4.5 million. The only Villa defender that's more than that is Alex Moreno at 5 million, and that's because of his attacking output. Everyone else, Torres, Mings, Carlos, Konza, Cash, etc., they're all 4.5. I think in terms of Villa defence in general, they conceded 1.26 expected goals per match last season. That put them as the 8th best team. But what you have to remember is that includes games under Steven Gerrard, and since Unai Emery has come in, there has been improvement there. I would expect that to continue this season, and therefore there's quite a lot to get excited about with Aston Villa, even with their defence. And even in the first 6 game weeks, they have got a few games where it could be worth playing one of their defenders if you needed to. So Everton at home in game week 2, Burnley away in game week 3, and Crystal Palace at home in game week 5. The only thing that slightly worries me now about Villa is they do have a lot of depth in that defence. The reason that I've picked Torres as the pick at this price point is because I just think his minutes will be great. Like, why would they have bought him otherwise? He's surely going to get a major role in that back four. But if you look at the other options they've got, because I know a lot of people like Matt Cash, and we are going to talk about him, potentially Cash or Konza could play right back. I know they're two different styles of player, but if they're going to have Moreno bombing forward, then they could have Konza making up a back three in possession. So those two can play right back. Then you've got Carlos and Konza that could play right centre back, and you've got Mings and Torres that could play left centre back, and obviously then Moreno mostly in that left back spot if he's fit, but Lucas Digne is also there as well. Now, a lot of people think, especially Villa fans, that Mings was so good last year that he won't get dropped, but how often do you see two left-footed centre backs play together? So I'm not quite convinced there, which is why I think Torres is the best option. If it looks like Matt Cash is first choice and going to play regularly, then of course you could look at him as well. He did miss some minutes last year, but that was through injury, and he does tend to get up and down that kind of right flank. So he could be worth looking at, but I just think there's a slight worry that Konza could play there at some points. I don't think we're going to have such an issue over minutes when it comes to Torres. So if I'm spending 4.5 on an Aston Villa defender as it stands, he's the one to go for. The other thing I like about an Aston Villa defender, most of us are going to set up with a squad where, you know, probably got some 5 to 5.5 million defenders we're going to play most weeks, and you don't necessarily need your 4.5 bench players straight away. And if you look at Aston Villa's longer term fixtures, they've got Brighton at home in game week 7, which I guess isn't ideal, but after that it's Wolves away, West Ham at home, Luton at home, Forest away, Fulham at home. There's lots of fixtures there you could play an Aston Villa defender, and if you don't need to, you can just leave them on the bench. So I think there's been a lot of improvement there under Unai Emery. They're looking strong, plenty of fixtures you could play them in if needed. My pick right now is probably Torres, but a lot of people like Matt Cash. So if I needed a cheap defender to play most weeks at the start of the season, I would definitely be looking at Brentford. If you look at their opening 6 game weeks, they got Fulham away, Crystal Palace at home, Bournemouth at home, and Everton at home. In game week 7, it's Forest away, and in game week 9, it's Burnley at home. So plenty of matches where you could play them if needed. In terms of their stats, last year it was 1.28 expected goals conceded per match, very similar to Aston Villa's numbers. So the defence is pretty good. If you're looking at their 4.5s, it's between Rico Henry and Ethan Pinnock. Now, in other videos, I've mentioned that I slightly prefer Pinnock. The reason for that is their expected goal involvement's very similar, but Pinnock's is skewed more towards goal threat, and goals are obviously worth more than assists. The only thing I'm now slightly worried about is possible competition when they play a back four, which they usually do. Sometimes they'll play a back three, but that's usually in tougher matches, which is the games where you won't want to play your defender anyway. And someone reminded me yesterday that Brentford have signed Nathan Collins from Wolves. So last year, it was mostly Ben Mee, who's 5 million, so not, for me anyway, not really worth looking at. And then obviously Ethan Pinnock as well. They were the 2 main centre-backs. But I wonder if at some point Collins will get some game time. I think from game week 1, for the first few weeks of the season, it probably will be Ben Mee and Ethan Pinnock. But will Collins provide some threat to one of those positions? Possibly. Whereas I think Rico Henry's got less competition for his role. So if you're slightly worried about that, like I might now be starting to be, then Rico Henry is probably the one to go for. But Brentford have got lots of good fixtures at the start of the season if you need to play that defender regularly. So Sven Botman is proving hugely popular already, currently owned by 30% of all FPL managers, and for good reason. Newcastle last year was second for expected goals conceded, just 0.94 per match. The only team they were behind was Man City. They were even ahead of teams like Arsenal, and there's every reason to believe that kind of defensive performances will continue this season, even with Champions League. They've already made midfield reinforcements with the likes of Tonali, so I think most of us are expecting Newcastle to be really good again. Of course, they do have better attacking defenders. Share is great in the air from set pieces. You got Trippier providing assists as well, but they are both more expensive than Botman. And his own personal numbers: 0.07 expected goals per 90, 0.04 expected assists. It's not like he can't get you the odd attack and return. It's not going to be as much as the other two, but of course he's only 4.5 million. The only slight issue with Newcastle is their opening fixtures, as we discussed before. Man City away game week 2, Liverpool at home game week 3, Brighton away game week 4. Don't see a huge amount of clean sheets there, but after that things look great. And I think if you look at your own squad structure, which defenders you've picked, like I look at my current team, and this will definitely change, right? But a lot of people have got Estepinian. Well, he's got Luton at home, Wolves away, West Ham at home, first 3 game weeks. You're going to easily play him every single one of those games. Gabriel is a set and forget. Forest at home, Palace away, Fulham at home, first 3. Even Luke Shaw, they do have Spurs away in game week 2, but outside of that, Wolves at home, Forest at home. So Newcastle might have pretty poor fixtures from game weeks 2 to 4, but you're probably not going to need them with the other defenders you've got in your team. After that, when injuries start creeping in, when maybe there's some players in your team that aren't getting as many minutes as you'd expect, well, suddenly you can rely on those Newcastle defenders because they got Brentford at home in game week 5, then Sheffield United away, Burnley at home, West Ham away, Palace at home, Wolves away, etc. So I am really struggling right now to look past just having Botman in my team. It just seems like 4.5 million for a Champions League defender. Yes, it's not very exciting. Yes, there's more attacking defenders. He's also owned by loads of people that will continue to go up by game week 1. But sometimes you've got to go with the obvious pick. So if you need a defender for a bit more of the long term, it's really difficult to look past Botman. So I've not mentioned the Crystal Palace defence much during pre-season so far, but after looking at their stats from last year, maybe I should have done, because their defensive numbers are pretty good. They conceded 1.18 expected goals per match. That was better than Brentford, better than Aston Villa, and it actually placed them 5th out of the entire league. Now, I'm not saying they will definitely be that good again next year, but the squad is pretty settled. We know already they've got Roy Hodgson in charge once again. They've already signed Jefferson Lerman to kind of shore up their midfield options as well. So things are looking pretty good for Crystal Palace. And there's every reason to believe that even if they're not the 5th best defence according to expected goals conceded, they will be right up there. That being said, I'm not sure there's a huge amount to get excited about in game week 1. None of their defenders are particularly attacking. They're not hugely better than any other defender we've spoken about so far. And if you look at their kind of good fixtures in the first 6 weeks, the ones where you might look to play one of their defenders are probably Sheffield United away game week 1, Wolves at home game week 4, and Fulham at home in game week 6. Whereas Brentford have got 3 good home games plus Fulham away, and even Aston Villa have 1 away game and 2 good home games in the opening 6. And I know last year, Crystal Palace's defensive numbers over the season were better than Aston Villa. But if you're asking me right now who's going to be better for this season, I would say it's probably going to be Aston Villa. If you do want to go for a Crystal Palace defender, Andersen is probably the one to go for. He seems to have the highest attacking threat out of all of their options. There is some transfer speculation that maybe he'll move on. We'll have to wait and see what happens during pre-season. If that's the case, you could go for Gay instead. But like I said, if I'm looking for a 4.5, I either want one that's really good in the long term, in which case I would just back the better defence in Newcastle, or if I need someone in the short term, Rico Henry, Ethan Pinnock are just as attacking, and they've probably got slightly better fixtures. So nothing against Crystal Palace. I'm just not quite sure where they fit in for our Game Week 1 squads. From a fixtures point of view, things look pretty good for Everton. They're opening 4 games of Fulham at home, Villa away, Wolves at home and Sheffield United away. They do then run into Arsenal at home and Brentford away, but straight after that, it's 2 home games against Luton and Bournemouth. So fixtures are pretty good. They may well pick up some clean sheets along the way. The problem I have is the Everton defence is just not very good. I think we all have these memories of Sean Dyche's Burnley side being a really solid defence, but the last couple of seasons that wasn't the case, and under Everton it hasn't got any better. If you look at last year, 19th for expected goals conceded, 1.61 per match. I don't think they've made any signings so far. I haven't really seen them linked with anyone either, and I just look at that squad and I don't know if there's going to be significant improvement from a defensive point of view. So do I really want to play my Everton defender most weeks? Probably not. Like I said, they do have pretty good fixtures. They may well get the odd clean sheet, but I think I would prefer to back other defences instead. If you're going to go for one of their players, it's probably James Tarkowski, who should be nailed on. He's a bit of a threat from set pieces as well. But for me right now, I just think if I've got a 4.5 million defender sat on the bench that maybe I need to call upon as and when, I probably don't want that player to be an Everton one. So the best West Ham defender in terms of minutes and attacking threat is probably Aguerd, and hopefully I've pronounced that somewhat correctly. The problem with West Ham is their fixtures just aren't great early on. In the first 6 game weeks, they got to play Chelsea, Brighton, Man City and Liverpool, and the 2 games outside of that against Bournemouth and Luton are a bit better, but they're both away from home, so that doesn't look ideal. Longer term, things do look better. From game week 7 onwards, they got Sheffield United at home, Newcastle at home, Villa away, Everton at home, Brentford away, Forest at home, Burnley away, etc. But if you're looking longer term, I think I'd rather go for a Villa or a Newcastle defender instead. And the other thing with West Ham, outside of their defenders, is they've got Areola at 4 million. Now, some people are speculating he might be the new number 1 for West Ham this season. But even if he's not, and you definitely wanted to kind of target those longer term good fixtures, you could start your game week 1 squad with Areola and Fabianski. Therefore, you would definitely cover the West Ham fixtures in goal for just 8.5 million. Obviously, you wouldn't be able to have then 3 outfield players or even 2 outfield players, but I think for West Ham, it's probably not going to matter a huge amount. So I think at some point during the season, we will be looking at their defenders. I'm just not convinced it needs to be from game week 1. So I just want to cover some of the other 4.5 million defenders that are worth keeping an eye on during pre-season, because if their minutes look good going into game week 1, you could consider them as well. First of all, we've got the Spurs left back Udogie, who was in the Serie A last year. In fact, in the last 2 seasons, his expected goal involvement per 90 minutes has been 0.24 both times, which is pretty good. So if he's looking nailed on, you could potentially get a fairly attacking Spurs defender for just 4.5. At the moment, Sessegnon is injured. It looks like Perisic is probably going to leave the club. There is Reguilon there as well, but I think Udogie will probably be ahead of him in the pecking order. So let's keep an eye on that. Lots of the Chelsea centre-backs outside of Thiago Silva are 4.5 million. So Badiashile, Chalobah, Colwill and Fofana. We know that Colwill is wanted by Brighton. I don't think Chelsea are necessarily going to sell him though. There is obviously rumours going around that Chalobah might leave as well. Whatever happens and whichever Chelsea centre-backs look like their first choice, they could be a bargain way into that defence. Obviously, you've got to be reliant on Chelsea improving because they were pretty awful defensively last year. But I think under Pochettino, like I've said before, I think we will see that happen. My guess would be right now that Fofana will be pretty much nailed on, but there's no guarantee of that. As it stands, he's 1.2% owned. So keep an eye on the Chelsea defenders if you don't want to spend kind of 5.5 on James or Chilwell. And at Brighton, lots of us have got Estupiñán at 5 million. Dunk is the same price, but Veltman could play right back, and Webster should continue to partner Dunk as well, as he has done quite regularly over the last couple of seasons. I would say, if you look at the Brighton defender page right now, they don't have a huge amount of options. We know they want to buy Colwill, so they are looking to add to their centre-back players. They've got Dunk, Webster and Van Heck. Now, he did play a little bit towards the end of last season, but mostly when Webster was injured. If it looks like he's first choice, he's only 4 million, but I don't think that's going to be the case. So Webster maybe, if they don't buy another centre-back, and possibly Veltman as well if he's still playing right-back. But they are a team we'll have to look at in pre-season just to see how De Zerbi is setting up. So we've got to cover the £4 million defenders. I suspect that most of us will have at least one in our squad going into game week 1. Some of you might even go for 2. And there are a lot of options this season. The 3 most popular are all from newly promoted sides. So you've got Bayer at Burnley, who's 8.3% owned, Bell at Luton, who's 21.6% owned, and then Baldock at Sheffield United, who's 6.2% owned. Now, looking at kind of opinions and stuff like that, especially from fans of Burnley and Luton, they seem to be in agreement that Bayer and Bell are pretty much nailed on. They're not necessarily going to offer you a huge amount of attacking threat, and of course they are playing for newly promoted sides, so clean sheets are going to be hard to come by, but they're only 4 million. There's only so much you should expect, and one of the reasons we go for them is so we can spend more money in other positions. So those two look pretty safe. Baldock seems to be split in opinion a little bit more about whether or not he's completely nailed on. Now, if you look at last season, he played loads of games, well over 30. The player that people think might come in is Bogle, but I asked a few Sheffield United fans this morning what they thought, and they think that Baldock is pretty much nailed on to start the season. Now, he might come off early in some games, eventually he might be replaced, but the good thing about him is he plays as a wing-back. So in terms of attacking threat, he's probably slightly better than both Bell and Bayer. And I think right now, if I was picking one, I probably would take that risk over the minutes, just in case I ever need him off the bench, hoping that he gets that attacking return. But picking either of those 3 players, Bayer, Bell or Baldock, there's probably no harm whichever one you go for. There are potentially some other options as well. Lots of Everton fans think that Branthwaite could be first choice centre-back this season. And to be fair, if you look at the options Everton have, there's not a huge amount of centre-backs there. So you've got Tarkowski, who should be pretty much nailed on. Then you've got Michael Keane, who wasn't great last season. Godfrey could potentially play centre-back as well, but Branthwaite had a pretty good spell at PSV, so possibly you've got a 4 million defender there. I know I've just slated the Everton defence. I don't think it's great whatsoever, but at 4 million you can't be quite so picky, so keep an eye on that in pre-season if he's first choice. The other 2 options, no guarantee they're going to get minutes whatsoever, but Gusto is a right-back, and his attacking numbers for Lyon last year were pretty good, and Reece James doesn't have the best injury record, so if he's out for any length of time, suddenly you're going to get a Chelsea defender who costs just 4 million. So keep an eye on that. And then I've already briefly mentioned Van Heck. I don't think he's suddenly going to become first choice centre back alongside Dunk, but if they don't buy anyone else and Webster gets injured or something like that, suddenly his minutes will go up. So right now, if you're picking a 4 million defender, you're definitely going for Bayer, Bell and Baldock, but potentially one of the others could be an option at some point this season. So I wanted to end by looking at the points predictions for some of these defenders that we've spoken about over on Fantasy Football Hub. As part of their memberships, they do have a points prediction tool. If you want to check that out, there is a link in the description below to get signed up to 50% off at the moment. And if you sign up and don't win your mini league, they will give you your money back. There's terms and conditions apply. Then there's a link for that in the description below. But what you can do is just set this to, if I just look at my other screen, defenders only. And then I'm going to go as high as possible, which I think is 8 game weeks. If you wanted to look at who the most points scored will be between like game weeks 4 and 8, you can do that as well. You can just change the game week range, but I'm going to leave it for the first 8 game weeks, and then I'm just going to put the player price right down to 4.5 million. So this should list defenders only at 4.5 or below, and Pinnock's right at the top. I do like him. I think the opening fixtures for Brentford are pretty good. If he is nailed on, his goal threat is decent as well. Then it's Botman, which is to be expected, even though Newcastle's game week 2 to 4 looks tough. They are such a solid defence and the fixtures are good afterwards. That's why he's so far up. Interestingly, Tarkowski, who I wasn't quite so sure about, is third. Then it's Dan Burn. If they don't sign a new left back and Target or anyone like that isn't playing regularly, then he could be an option. Obviously, Coleman at Everton, it'd be interesting to see who plays right back. It could be Patterson instead. Then Rico Henry, who I mentioned, and Andersen as well. So if you want to take a look through stuff like that and make use of the other Fantasy Football Hub tools, make sure you click that link in the description below. Otherwise, give the video a like if you've enjoyed it, hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, and I'll catch you again soon for another video.